Galar, they soon discovered, had all the telepathic ability of a rock. He couldn't even make himself heard psionically across the slavehold, much less across the expansive desert between him and his tribe. Jedra, however, surprised them all. With only a few hours of Cayenne's coaching, he learned to send his thoughts to anyone in the hold, even the Thrycreen. His control was terrible. Everyone near his intended target heard garbled voices in their heads as well, but the raw power behind his sending was more than Cayenne had ever seen before. "You'd better stop," she suggested after a particularly strong blast had reached half the slaves in the hold. "There's no way the guards could miss that. They might not care about a little telepathy among the slaves, but they're going to do something about it if you keep it up." Jedra sighed. He'd been given a glimpse of something incredible within himself, then told to close his eyes. "I think I should try to contact the Juradai," he said. "Fid, you admitted my power is stronger than yours. I might be able to reach them." "No." Cayenne pounded the deck between them with her fist. "You don't know what you're talking about. Your unfocused thoughts wouldn't make it beyond the first dune. You've got to learn control first." She leaned back against the wall. "Wait, bide your time. Sooner or later an opportunity will come along, and then maybe you can use your talent." "Maybe." Jedra grumbled, but he supposed Cayenne was right. He would wait for a little while. He soon learned that the easiest way to wait, and to escape the heat, was to spend as much time as possible unconscious. He leaned back against the wall and let the creaking of the wagon lull him to sleep. Jedra floated face down in a pool of water. The bottom was far out of reach, but the water was so clear only a faint shimmering told him he was seeing through anything but air. He drifted peacefully along, watching his shadow slip over the sand below, but when another shadow blotted out his own, and he turned to see what cast it, he found himself suddenly sinking downward. He thrashed his arms and legs, but the water wouldn't support him. He hadn't been breathing while adrift. Now he needed to breathe desperately, but couldn't. The foreign shadow extended itself toward him, and suddenly Jedra felt a hand clasping his arm, pulling him upward. His head broke the surface, and he gasped in a breath, blinking in astonishment at his rescuer. It was Galar, still bound at the wrists, but behind him, Jedra could see an entire tribe of elves. He saw their gaily colored tents, their herds of long, beetle-like pack animals called kinks, their willowy children playing in the sand. Jedra sat up with a start, momentarily disoriented, to find himself back in the slavehold of the merchant caravan. He'd seen a tribe of elves. He could still see them clearly in his mind. Could his sleeping brain have used some sort of psionic vision to locate the Juradai? It was possible. Cayenne had told him he had other untrained skills besides telepathy. Jedra turned to ask her, but she was still asleep, and now that he was using his eyes again, the image in his mind started to fade. He closed his eyes and tried to concentrate. Yes, there they were, a whole tribe of elves camped out near a desert oasis. He could still see them, but he knew he couldn't hold on to them for long. It was now or never, he realized. Concentrating hard on the elves in his vision, he tried to focus his thoughts in the way Cayenne had taught him. He felt a hint of recognition, a faint twinge of contact. It was enough. He summoned all the energy he could muster into the single thought. Galar of the Juradai is held captive in a caravan a day out from Uruk, on the road to Tyre. Retribution came suddenly, and with such intensity that Jedra cried out as if he were being burned alive, for that was exactly what it felt like. He writhed in agony, feeling his skin peel away in sheets of flame. The pain was worse than anything he'd imagined possible, and it went on, far longer than it would have if he'd really been on fire. A real fire would have killed him by now. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the pain went away. Jedra collapsed on the deck, gasping for air. Cayenne lifted him to cradle his head on her lap. "You had to try it," she said. "Dream." Jedra whispered through the memory of pain. "I saw the elves in a dream, saw my chance. Your chance to get us all punished." The dwarf growled, eyeing the door warily, but no guards appeared. Gaylor looked to Jadra and asked, "Did you reach them?" "I don't know. Don't know." Jadra's whole body shuddered involuntarily with the release of tension. "I couldn't tell." Gaylor asked Cayenne, "Could he really have found them in a dream?" She shrugged. "Who knows? It's possible, I suppose." "What did you see?" Jedra described the camp, with its colored tents and pens full of kinks. "Colored tents?" asked Galler. "Red and green and yellow, with blue and yellow banners flying from their peaks," Jedra said. Galler shook his head sorrowfully. "I don't know whom you saw, if indeed you saw anyone at all, but the tents of the Juradai are the color of the sand. Their only marking is the tribe totem on the walls." Galler held out his arm to show them a tattoo on his wrist, an angular, stylized rain cloud with daggers for raindrops. "Oh." Jadra pulled himself up to a sitting position. "I was stupid. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Cayenne said. "You didn't know. I'd have probably done the same thing in your position." "I didn't know," Jedra said sullenly. "That's starting to sound like my motto. Don't be so hard on yourself." She said, "You're learning." "Oh, yes. I'll be a master by the time I die on the ziggurat." With that, Jedra turned away and refused to respond to any further words of comfort. The wagon rolled on. Exhausted, Jadra slept, this time without any dreams of elves, and when he awoke, it was already morning. The guards brought wooden mugs of water and bowls of thin gruel, but Jedra had barely eaten half of his before they unshackled him and led him into the upper decks of the wagon. He expected to be taken to the psionicist and reprimanded again for his offense, so he was surprised when the guard brought him to the cabin he had shared for so short a time with Dornall. The guard knocked, and the mage himself opened the door. "Well, hello," Dornall said, stepping aside. "Do come in." The guard gave Jedra a shove, and he staggered into the room. "Thank you," Dornall said, tossing the guard a silver coin. Jedra gasped. That was probably more money than the man made in a month. Dornall was obviously buying his silence. Sure enough, the guard left and closed the door behind him. "You were holding out on me," Dornall said, almost conversationally. "You shouldn't have done that, because now I will have to use less subtle methods to extract the information I need." He waved his hands, and Jedra once more felt his muscles lock into place. The wagon lurched. He felt himself topple forward and instinctively tried to throw out his hands to keep his balance. Spell crippled, his arms didn't move, but he nonetheless kept his balance, and Dornall, directly in front of him, staggered backward as if Jedra had actually pushed him. "What's this?" the man asked, astonished. He righted himself and waved his arms again, just as Jedra frantically tried to imagine a fist slamming into the magician. Dornall rocked back on his heels with the blow, but the renewed binding spell clamped down on the boy with the force of a giant's fist. He fell face first to the deck, striking with a resounding thump. Blood gushed from his nose, and it felt as if he'd bitten his tongue. "Your pitiful little tricks won't help you, boy," Dornall growled, kicking Jedra repeatedly until the half-elf nearly fainted from the pain of broken ribs and a fractured skull. Jedra tried to scream, but the binding spell wouldn't allow it. He tried to strike out psionically, but the pain prevented him from concentrating. Satisfied at last that Jedra was subdued, Dornall dragged him by the heels into the patch of sunlight shining through the porthole. Jedra felt the heat on his bare back, then a sudden burning. Dornall was using the lightning glass on him. Now, Dornall said, "you will tell me everything you know." He relaxed the binding spell enough to allow Jedra to speak, and the boy let out his breath in a long, gurgling scream. At last he found his voice. "Stop!" he shouted, turning his head far enough to see the magician kneeling over him. "I'll tell you anything you want. You will tell me the truth. Dornall said, drawing the point of heat slowly across Jedra's back. Starting with what other powers you have and how you invoke them. Cursing and weeping with the pain, Jedra told Dornall what little he knew, but the magician obviously didn't believe him. He held the glass over the boy's back, demanding more, until Jedra wished he had some hidden knowledge to give Dornall so that the torture would end. At last, Jedra screamed, "I don't know anymore. Kill me or let me go, but stop hurting me." Dornall leaned back out of the sunlight and scraped sweat off his brow with the edge of his hand. "You're in no position to make demands," he said. "On the other hand, I'm beginning to think you're telling the truth." He gave Jedra one last burn, just for spite, then went to the door and shouted for the guard to put the boy back in the hold. This time his wounds were real. Jedra was dimly aware of being locked up again, of warm hands touching him, of Cayenne and Galar discussing his injuries, but he was beyond caring. He wanted only to die. Even death was denied him. Jedra felt strength pouring back into him with the same relentlessness with which it had been ripped away, healing and revitalizing his wounds. It took time. He was aware of the wagon moving again and of the day wearing on into night. He was aware of Cayenne holding on to him throughout. She was doing this, he knew. She was lending him her strength. He woke with the dawn, aching and hungry but healed. Cayenne looked gaunt with fatigue. When the guards came with food and water, he made her eat and drink most of his, despite her protests that he needed it as much as she did. "You gave me too much of your own strength," he said. Then, more softly, "I didn't know such a thing was possible." "Of course it is," she said. "That's how healing works. All of my powers are like that. Sharing thoughts, sharing ability, sharing health, it's all the same sort of thing." "Sharing ability?" She shrugged. "Well, if you've got something you can do, but I can't, and if I've got something I can do but you can't, then we can put our heads together and do them both at the same time." Jedra could feel sudden excitement building in him. "What if you try to share the same ability? Does it get stronger?" "Depends on what you're trying to do." "Why?" "What would happen if we both tried calling the Jura die?" Cayenne snorted. "Will you forget that idea? Wasn't it enough that you almost got yourself killed? Not if we can make it work this time. Look, you've got the control we need to actually reach someone. I've got the power to get us there, even if we don't know just who we're looking for. I was close last time. I know I was. A little more control, and I'd have made contact." "You think?" "I know. If you're wrong, then we both suffer the guard's reaction. I can't heal you again if I'm hurt too." The dwarf said, "Whether he's right or wrong, you'd better be able to take care of the guards before you try anything. Another escape attempt, and they'll probably punish us all. And if they do, I promise you'll regret it. We've got to try something." Jedra said, "We've got to escape this caravan before we get to Tyre." "I have no objection to escaping," the dwarf said. "You just make sure we do escape when you try it, though." "He's right," said Cayenne. "It's a long trip. We can afford to wait for a better opportunity." "I don't want to wait." "Well, you're going to have to," she said, "because I'm not going to help you get yourself hurt again." Jedra looked to Galar for help, but the elf only held out his slender hands in a gesture that said as plain as words, "What can we do?" About midday, the caravan came to an outpost. The slaves could hear shouts of joy from the wagon guards, but those shouts soon turned to dismay when the guards saw that the outpost had been raided recently. The wagon stopped only long enough for the guards to sift through the ruins, then started up again. That night when they brought water, the mugs were only half full. When the slaves complained, one of the guards growled, "Be glad you get any. The raiders poisoned the well. We're all on half rations until we get to the next outpost." The slaves had been getting the bare minimum already, half that was hardly enough to keep them alive. They made it through another day and a half before a sandstorm blew up out of the deep desert and forced them to a stop, and there they stayed for 2 more days, listening to the howl of sand-laden wind battering against the wagon's closed hatches. The second day they got no water at all. Their mouths and tongues were too swollen to allow speech. They've given up on their cargo, Cayenne said in Jidra's mind when the evening water time came and went without a show of guards. Now they're hoarding what's left for themselves. I think it's time we tried calling for help, Jidra answered. No. Why not? We've got nothing to lose, do we? We're going to die in this hold in a day or two anyway, unless we do something. Cayenne said nothing. Jedra could hear her labored breathing in the dark beside him. Let's at least say we died trying. After a long time, she answered. Let's see if we can try and live to tell about it instead. The convergence felt a little like the sharing of thoughts, but this time their combined consciousness grew until they felt like a single, incredibly powerful being. The slave hold took on a shimmery, not quite substantial quality, as if the linked Jedra and Cayenne existed on a higher plane that was only loosely tied to reality. It looked much like Jidra's underwater dream when he had seen the elves. Unlike in his dream, they could move freely here, directing their attention wherever they chose. Cautiously, lest they alert the psionic guard to their presence, they drifted through the wagon's walls and out into the desert, searching for a tribe of elves. The sandstorm was a whisper of motion, nothing more. In the dream, Jadra and Cayenne became a swift, sleek-winged bird darting over the desert. The minds of other travelers were great funnels down which they could slide, only to find themselves looking out of strange eyes at the interiors of wagons or tents. None belonged to the elves they sought. They searched outward in ever-widening spirals, leaving the storm behind and speeding over the dunes faster than any real bird could fly, rising higher and higher to see more desert at once, until, finally, they found an enormous well leading down toward dozens of tents pitched at the base of a mountainous dune. The tents would have been hard to spot if the dreamscape hadn't exaggerated them out of proportion, for they were the same grayish-yellow color as the sand. Their walls were decorated with the stylized cloud-raining daggers that Galar had shown them. Found them, they thought together. They dropped toward the largest tent, felt themselves being drawn into the mind of the elf inside, and looked out through his eyes to see a bard playing a harp to a dozen or more elves, reclining on woven rugs. The elves' clothing made up for the lack of color on their tents. Men and women alike wore loose, rainbow-colored blouses and pants. Desert life had darkened their leathery skin to a deep brown. Jedra's and Cayenne's host became aware of their presence, and quickly they sent. Galar of the Juradai is a slave in a caravan caught in a sandstorm 5 days out from Uruk to Tyre. They had no time to listen for a response. The tent and its occupants swirled as if they were smoke blown by the wind, and suddenly Jedra and Cayenne were adrift over the desert again. The guard, they realized. He heard our sending. A whirlwind danced across the dunes toward them. The guard's attack on their minds rendered visible in the dreamscape. Cayenne and Jedra became a bird again, darting in and out around the whirlwind, seeking some sign of weakness where they could press an attack of their own. Inside, the part that was still Cayenne said, directly into his mind. They flew over the top and down through the center of the funnel. The whirlwind writhed like a snake, trying to throw them out, but they were faster. When they reached the point of the funnel, they grew larger and spread their wings outward with the force Jedra had discovered when Dornal had attacked him. The whirlwind spun into fragments, leaving a dark shadow of itself in its place. Jedra and Cayenne slid into the shadow and found themselves in a silent, unguarded cave. They had knocked the guard unconscious. Kill him. Jedra said, No, heal him so no one else knows anything happened. Cayenne answered, including himself. They wound their way through the dark caverns of the guard's mind, sealing off whole sections of it as they passed. They let him keep just enough psionic ability to monitor the slaves, but not enough to harm them, and they blocked his memory of the battle completely. They left him snoring peacefully in his cabin, then dissolved their link. Coming out of convergence felt like losing half their intelligence. Jedra wanted to join again immediately, but the new fatigue in his dehydrated body warned him that he had already paid a high enough price for their temporary enhancements. Doing it again would have to wait for better days. The sandstorm blew over in the night, and the wagon moved out again the next day, reaching another outpost by evening. This one was still standing, and for the first time in 3 days the slaves received water. Their strength slowly returned, and Jedra and Cayenne began to hope they might survive long enough to learn whether or not their efforts had come to anything. The other slaves weren't even aware at first of what Jedra and Cayenne had done. But since they had already gotten away with it, the two finally decided to tell their fellow prisoners. At first, the others were cautiously optimistic, but when another day passed without action, their mood began to grow ugly. "The elves aren't going to come," said one. "We don't even know if they exist," said another. "Should have known better than to trust a half-elf boy," a third muttered. "A half-elf and a Templar," the dwarf put in, "feeding us false hope, so we'd think they were with us." Galler spoke up. "If my people heard the call, they will come." "They heard it," Jedra said. "Give them time. They were a long way away." But inwardly he wondered, would they come? He got his answer that evening when a sudden commotion broke out on the upper decks. Shouts and the pounding of running feet echoed down the companionways, and the wagon lurched to a halt as a loud crack of thunder split the air. "Link up," Cayenne hissed, and almost immediately she and Jedra were back in convergence. The wagon became insubstantial, and their consciousness slipped away and upward to watch the battle. The desert was covered with elves and their beetle-like kinks. Armed raiders swarmed like ants up the sides of the wagon, hacking at the guards with swords and overpowering them by sheer numbers. A silver eagle with iridescent wings flew through the dreamscape, breathing fire upon the defenders. The elves had a psionicist as well, it seemed. A tiny whirlwind rose toward it, the greatly diminished wagon guard returning the attack, but even as they joined battle, a third warrior entered the dream. It came as a giant black bat, but the bat was different in texture from the eagle and the whirlwind. It had a soft-edged fuzziness about it, as if it were somehow less substantial than the others, and its face was recognizably human. Dornell, Jedra realized. Does he have psionic power too? He's fighting with magic, Cayenne said. That's why he doesn't look the same as the others. His insubstantiality in the psionic vision evidently didn't affect his ability to enter the fray. The bat swept over the eagle and the whirlwind, spitting lightning bolts ahead of it like spears. It attacked indiscriminately, blasting both with multiple strikes until the eagle fell smoking from the sky and the whirlwind blew away into nothing. Then it turned its attention to Jedra and Cayenne. They had been hovering overhead as a bird again, but as the bat rose toward them, their combined intellect fashioned a barrier, a sheet of glass that trapped the lightning's fury and held the bat at bay. Lightning glass, Jedra thought. Exulting in his newfound abilities, he bent the glass to match the shape of the piece he had discovered in the bazaar, and suddenly the bat beneath it glowed white-hot, flared, and disappeared in a cloud of greasy smoke. The dreamscape shook as if gripped by an earthquake, and Jedra and Cayenne tumbled out of convergence to find the slave hold full of elven raiders, 2 of whom were slicing through their bonds. The leader of the elves, a heavily muscled warrior who bled from half a dozen sword slashes, advanced into the hold. He grinned when he saw Galar and said, "You look like walking death." "So do you," Gala replied, and the two embraced like long-lost brothers. "You may all go free," the elf warrior said to the slaves, "but take nothing with you. Everything in this wagon now belongs to the Jura. Day." Galar nodded to Jedra and Cayenne. "These are the ones who called you here," he said. The warrior bowed to the half-elf and the human. "In that case, You may take whatever you wish, and you may travel with the Jura Dei until you reach the safety of your own kind." "Thank you," Jedra said. "There's one thing in particular I'd like to retrieve." He took Cayenne's hand and led her out of the slavehold, up narrow companionways choked with elves already hauling the wagon's cargo away and onto the passenger deck. Smoke seeped from beneath Dornell's cabin door. They opened it cautiously, holding their breath against the stench of burned meat, and looked inside to see the magician's body lying on the floor, his charred flesh curling from exposed bones. Horrified at the spectacle, but unable to look away, Jedra stepped into the room. The floor was barely scorched around the body. It was as if the magician had burned from the inside out. "How could we have done such a thing?" he whispered in his mind. "Wild talent can be unpredictable." Cayenne answered. Jedra stared at the body until he was forced to breathe, then finally said, "I think we need to tame it then." The lightning glass rested on the floor near one crisped hand. Jedra picked it up and turned away, but Dornell's traveling bag sitting open on the bunk made him pause. He upended it, and along with the clothing out fell two small leather sacks. One held magical amulets, and the other was full of money. Jedra took them both and left the room. "These will probably be useful where we're going," he said as he closed the door behind him. "Where is that?" Cayenne asked aloud. "Someplace where we can find a real member of the Veiled Alliance," he said. He led the way out of the wagon's interior and down the gangplank to the sand where the elves were piling their booty. Cayenne blinked in the sudden brightness. "Why the Alliance?" she asked. "Because there's still too much we don't know," Jedra replied. He saw her puzzlement and went on. "Ignorance got me into this mess. If it hadn't been for you, I'd have never gotten out of it. But even now I know just enough to be dangerous. If we are going to survive in this world, then we need to master the forces that shape it, and for that, we need a mentor." "We?" she asked. Jedra grinned. "Well, after all we've gone through, I just am assuming something I shouldn't." She shook her head and smiled. "No, we sounds just fine to me."